All right, hello and welcome to this webinar in our ongoing series. This is today going to be how award-winning organizations design learning for impact. Really appreciate you all joining today. I'm David Wentworth. I'm the Managing Director of Learning and Talent here at Brandon Hall Group. I do really appreciate you taking time out of this highest of holidays of April Fool's Day to join me. I know most people have the day off, I think, so I'm glad you're spending it with me. And yeah, also really happy that you're joining me on this topic. We're going to dig into some actual case studies of ours, the deepest that we can go in 30 minutes. And so looking forward to sharing that with you. So as always at the top, I just want to make sure everyone's really aware of who we are and what we're doing. And if you're not doing any of these things, you should probably look at some of these things and join us, whether it's participating in the Excellence Awards. If you're a part of an organization that can do something like that, we've got our Excellence Awards, our Excellence in Technology, Education Technology, and Excellence in Action Awards. You can see the dates there of the programs. Of course, we love live events, and so we're already planning our 2027 conference next January. It's going to be fantastic. We've got our live events at Brick, which is our office space and slash event space in Boca Raton. So we have our AI and HR Summit and also our Leadership Summit coming up at that venue. And of course, we've got the Institute, which hopefully some of you are members of. If you're not, take a look into that because that's where these case studies live that I'm going to be showing you today, amongst thousands of others. But it's a really great resource for folks to get deeper information than I'm possibly going to be able to provide you for today. Today's going to be just a little bit of a taste. So take a look at that if you like. Also, as we go through, please feel free to ask me questions, make commentary, chat with each other even in the chat. Please, it's open and I encourage you to use it throughout. I'll try to keep an eye on that, answer any questions that might come up. And if we do have time at the end, I'll also answer any questions that we may have missed. But please feel free to actively use that. It does not offend me at all. All right, so we're talking about companies that are designing learning for impact. And it seems like, well, why are we talking about that? Because of course we're designing for impact. Why else would we be making learning programs or developing content or leveraging programs? Why else are we doing that? Well, it turns out that organizations generally, I'm not saying yours specifically, but generally are not really good at this. They're not really great at tying their learning programs to some sort of performance outcome, whether it's an organizational outcome, individual outcomes. We ask companies in a study, how proficient are you at identifying performance outcomes prior to designing and delivering learning, right? So designing for impact, what we're talking about today. Only 40% said they're either proficient or highly proficient at that. So the rest of the 60%, they just say that they're not very good at that. So again, it begs the question, what are we designing our learning for, right? If we're not looking at these outcomes, what are we looking at? And a separate question, we find that 60% say they really haven't even attempted to determine the impact of specific learning modalities, whether, is our instructor-led training having a specific impact? Is gamification having a specific impact? Is video having a specific impact? Not even attempted to find out if that's working. We're trying those things, which is good, but very little follow-up to see if that impact is actually occurring. A few more dimensions on this to show you sort of how complex and how deep the issue is. We ask companies, how often do you measure learning, the impact, if you are measuring for impact, right? So we've already seen there isn't a lot of that going on. But when you do, how often are you measuring that outcome in relationship to a learning program? 40% say one time. That's the biggest group, just once. You got 38% that do twice, and then obviously precipitous drop off for measuring more than that. So, we've sort of fooled ourselves into this idea that if I just check, 6 months, 3 months, whatever it may be after the fact and check in and things seem to be okay, then we're being successful. So there's not, and I know this isn't easy to do, right? It's not as though it's like, oh, we'll just measure everything 10 times. But we could do a better job of trying to see if we're actually having the impact that we're hoping that we're going to have. So even when companies say they are measuring, they're not doing it super in depth, again, generally speaking. And then, we also ask companies your learning measurement strategy, your overall strategy for measuring whether learning is working. Does it have a focus on linking learning to these or performance outcomes, whether individual or organizational? Biggest group, almost 40%, sometimes yes, sometimes no. And you can't really get in there and I don't want to infer anything, but based on my conversations with companies and anecdotally, I'm feeling that it's probably more sometimes no than sometimes yes, right? And then you've got 25%, a full quarter say, nope, we don't. So again, just sort of highlighting the fact that this is why the stories that I'm going to share here in a minute are so important because we're not doing a really good job of measuring this stuff. Here, bear with me one second. Okay, with me as I'm just having a slight issue. And there we go. Um, all right, you know what I want to do for you folks, if you don't mind. Okay. Um, All right. So if you don't mind, I would like to, I mean, if you can help me out, I would like to just ask a couple questions of the group before I dive into the case studies that we're going to share. So the first thing, those things that I mentioned at the top of the session around the different programs that we have, the events, those kind of things, any of those things that you might be interested in learning more about. This way, we can just get right to you. You don't have to search it out later on your own. Just it makes it easier for us. If any of those things seem interesting to you, let us know and we'll get you the info and get you on your way. We'll just give you a couple seconds to figure out to answer this question for us. And then I have a little bit more of a researchy type question after this too. So just give me a sec here on this question. And all right, there we go. And then the next question I want to ask is, if you were to look at your organization's L&D strategy, program, function generally, where do you think you fall in this? Right? Is it phase one, two, three, four? The descriptions are there. This helps us with our progression models. We ask these questions continuously and trying to get a sense of where companies tend to be and how that shifts over time. So in each of our events, we always try to ask this question. Helps us create that longitudinal research to see where people are, how things are going. So again, if you have a second, just answer that question for me. And we'll give another couple seconds on that. And as that's up, I'm going to jump ahead back to where I was in the data. So, I'm assuming most, if not all of us, are familiar with the Kirkpatrick model. And look, whether or not you formally ascribe to the Kirkpatrick model of measurement, chances are your organization is still sort of doing things in this way. You're measuring the reaction. Did people like it? Do they care for it? Is it relevant to their job? Are they learning? Can they pass an assessment? What's that? Behavior. Are they doing things differently than they were prior? And then, of course, results, right? Are the things that are supposed to change in the business actually changing? So when we talk about designing for impact, clearly, that second half of this model is the impact side. And, I know it says one, two, three, four, but I know that the gap between two and three is massive. It's just the logistics of doing that are much more challenging. And even Kirkpatrick themselves don't say, oh, you should measure every single program at levels three and four. They understand that that's, probably scalably impossible. But we do find that, fewer and fewer companies are really measuring their programs at this level. So they're not even sure how or if their organizations are having impact with their learning. And then the last piece of our research data I want to share before I get into the stories is just, this is a broader question about learning measurement, but 54%, right? So a little more than half, but only a little more say that they use performance results to validate the effectiveness of their learning programs. So it's like, what are the other 46% using to validate the effectiveness? And I've said this, and if you've heard me speak before you maybe have heard me say this, but there's an issue when, look, most of the learning professionals that I talk to are really, really good at this. They're really good at their jobs. They're really great at creating learning and delivering it. They really understand the whole concept and the brain science behind learning. But one of the challenges about being so good at it and things being kind of siloed, there's this feeling as though as long as we create the learning and deliver it, we know it works because we're really good at what we do. So the fact that we did it makes it so that you know we it's good work and it's valid. But that's not enough. We have to actually be measuring things. So the fact that so many companies aren't using performance results to validate their learning, and they're not using it to validate the return on investment or the value of their learning programs, it's even fewer. And you can see on and on and on that there's very little of this stuff going on very often. So then just to set the stage, again, we've only got a short time together today. Um, just to set the stage that if this sounds familiar to you, you're not alone. This is a big challenge that's going on. But what I want to share are a couple of these case studies to show you companies that are doing things really differently and really well. And so, if you're not familiar with our awards program, the three stories I'm going to share with you are from Gold Award winners, and I've boiled these down. These case studies are very, very in depth, from starting from business needs all the way through measurable outcomes. Very, very in depth. They're in our institute. They're accessible to institute members. But I just picked three that I can quickly dive into and show you some of the highlights around why these particular companies won their gold awards. All right, so the first one is the company's Randstad Digital, and the name of their program is Skill Up. That's what they called it, and their description of it is elevating talent capabilities and driving organizational success. That's their name and description for this program. So when they were working on this, and as they were putting this together, they knew that they had specific areas of impact that they wanted to focus on, right? And so they're talking about their skills, the skill to deliver. So they wanted to make sure that these project team members could increase their productivity, better quality, and obviously enhancing those customer satisfaction scores, right? But then they also wanted skill to grow. So we needed pipeline for more talent coming, a pipeline of people growing up in the role as the business needs change. And so we want to make sure that the organization is future ready from a skills standpoint. And then skills to place, making sure that as things change, we can move people around based on the skills that we have available to us, and then upskill where needed to fill any gaps. And so they really had this business mindset to the Skill Up program as they put it together. This is where they were starting from. How do we solve these business challenges that we're facing from a development standpoint? And that's the genesis of the whole program, right? And so they figured, okay, this is how we're going to put it together based on that. We're going to make it personalized, so adaptive, that people are getting what they need when they need it, based on the skills gaps that they particularly have. So very, very relevant to people. So to eliminate just sort of an overload of unnecessary, irrelevant learning and focus on what people need. A blend so that people are getting it in the ways that made the most sense for them. It's another element of personalization, that there's a lot of different learning available to everybody to meet their needs. They leverage a SEAL framework, right? So that this, for them, it's set the vision, engage the organization, align behaviors, and link to the future. I know in a webinar, and I'm reading through this, it just seems kind of like, oh, that's a throwaway, right? This an acronym for these things. But when they bake that into the process and how they build things, it creates a cornerstone for them of make sure that these things are being met and thought of in everything that we're doing as we build this together. That's going to keep us aligned. It's going to keep us focused on these outcomes instead of getting very involved in the development of the program and then kind of putting our heads down and following where the program goes. We stay aligned with the things that we're trying to do for the business. And then they also wanted to make sure, of course, given their particular industry, they had a lot of certified training that had to go in there, which is very important to their skill levels and where they are. So they made sure that that was all integrated too. Very important to the business that their people have these certifications. And so, as always, in all these case studies, the final segment for it is, what are the measurable outcomes? What are the impacts? And look, I will say, all of these include things, these award winners, they include completion rates, they include feedback scores, because those things are not unnecessary and they're not important. They do matter in the greater context of other things. But we wanted to focus on the things that they included from a measurement standpoint that were impact based, right? So by their definitions of what they needed from a skills standpoint, Randstad Digital found that after launching this program, 85% of their workforce was considered to be upskilled from where they were before, based on all of the different, and again, the vast details of all these things are in the case studies. I can't go through them all here. It would take hours. But their calculation was $1.2 million in annual cost savings. They found that they were 3 times faster to fill the requisitions from customers. And they had this thing that they call revenue sustenance. So they managed to keep this $400,000 recurring revenue that was a benchmark that they had. So again, they had this alignment of the academy that they built and the different outcomes that the business needed. And the other outcomes, 3/4 of the bench talent was redeployed. Again, going to that upskilling and reskilling element. Where do we put things? How do we get them where we need them? 45% increase in course completion. So you remember, I told you, completions you don't have to not do them, but don't rely solely on them. But an increase in these course completions is what helps lead to these other outcomes. So amazing impact on the business because they designed with those things in mind from the get-go. The next one, Federal Bank, and their program was called Explore. And their description of the program was equipping employees across roles with essential sales and consultative skills. Again, a very focused outlook on the program. This is specifically what they wanted to happen, what they were looking for. So, according to the bank, Explore was structured to ensure that employees, not only got these essential skills, but applied them, right? Again, this goes to that measurement. You can have someone take an assessment and says, okay, you learned the thing, but are you actually doing them? Is that actually occurring out in the real world? And I think you can all are familiar with the scenario in which that translation did not happen, where people said, oh, I took the training, I completed it, it was fine, gave it a thumbs up, I passed the assessment, and everybody went back to the way they were doing things. So they were very focused on, no, we need to make sure things are occurring differently as we go. So it had to be evidence-based and grounded in the industry-proven sales methodology. So they know what works for the banking industry. So they wanted to focus on that and make sure that those things are being adhered to, best practices. And then based on that, all the content had to be relevant and aligned with that. So there's a very, strategic focus on, it isn't just broad, hey, everybody, here's how you sell better. Within specifically their industry and their organization, these are the things that we want to focus on. They also started again with impact at the beginning. They wanted to influence the performance of everybody as they built this, focusing on the ability to close the deals. What was it that's keeping people from closing? Let's figure out how to fix that. How do we get our customer sat scores up and just create better, stronger, longer lasting relationships with the clients? And then it's nice to say all those things and say, this is what we want to happen, but it has to be measurable, right? You can't say, I'm going to build this program and it's going to make X, Y, Z happen with no mechanism to measure how X, Y, Z are happening. So they also knew from the outset that there had to be these evaluation mechanisms to figure out if these things are working. Far too often, companies will build these programs with the best of intentions and wait till it's actually completed and rolled out. And they say, okay, we should probably measure this now without a real clear strategy on how to measure it. So from the get-go, those mechanisms are put into place. Federal Bank was they ascribed to the Kirkpatrick model, so they adhere to that, and based on those levels, the results that they saw were great. So they got a 4.8 out of 5 satisfaction score. That's pretty good. 100% job relevance. So all the people that took the training felt that it was relevant to their job. Very critical if you want it to stick and if you want behaviors to change. So again, these level 1 measurements, they're not useless. They just need to occur in conjunction with other things. And so after the assessment, the level 2, right? Did they learn 40% rise proficiency based on how they've been measuring this stuff in the past? That, are the behaviors changing? 95% field application of these habits, right? The things that they were training people on, as they went back and looked and they monitored what was happening in the field, 95% of people were applying the things that they had learned. And then four is the impact, right? So they had these, again, very specific to this bank, this company. These are the things that they measure. They have the AUM growth, and you can look up what that is. But for them, that's a target. And then there's the fee income targets, right? I don't know, as consumers, we want to hear about this from the inside, but it's important to them as a bank that they hit these targets. And they definitely had lift as a direct result of this program. And so other stuff that they found, right? Then this is a quote from the case study that Explorer delivered a significant and measurable impact on the bank's business performance. Based on what we were looking at the beginning of this session, not a lot of organizations can say that about a lot of their programs. So some of the targets they had, specific targets of we want high net worth individual savings account growth at our banks to grow by 15%. They saw it go up 17%. They have this measurement called total liability value, and they wanted to grow that. Well, it would target 15%, rose by 17.5%. And again, I know that we don't like to hear about fee income, maybe if you're using a bank, but it's a source of revenue for them, and they wanted to increase fee income. And you can see that they had a target of 600 million, and they landed at 710. So, they have these targets, they have these things that they can measure, things that the business is already measuring. This is what I always say whenever I talk about measurement with learning professionals: is we're not asking you to create brand new metrics and brand new measurements out of nowhere, right? It's these things exist. They're important to your company. They're already measuring them. We have to figure out how to build to those things and then measure whether those things are connected. And that's what that program was doing, Explore for Federal Bank. This next one that I want to share is Pegasus Airlines, and the name of their program was Go Ahead. And the way they describe it is empowering mid-level leaders to deliver enterprise-wide impact and strategic transformation. Now, I want you to know this is not something that, for the awards program, that we tell these companies, hey, name your program and give it a tagline. This is coming from them. And it may seem small, it may seem insignificant, but the fact that they give these programs a name, right? So then there's this identity that they can build around and get everybody invested in, and they give it a mission that you can align with it and check back to make sure everything you're doing is, are we on task with the mission? It has an effect. It really matters that for buy-in, for everyone to get involved and to keep everything aligned. So you'll see that as a trend in these three. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't necessarily notice that when I first was putting this together. It was once I put them all together, because I picked, again, we have thousands of case studies. I picked these three, and I noticed a trend. Give it a name, give it a mission, and that helps everybody stick with it. So for their particular program, they looked at, okay, what are our current business conditions? And this is, just only a couple of years ago, but a lot of long tail impact from COVID, right? So they had their post-pandemic transformation. What do we do now, right? There was the during reaction, and then it's like, okay, what do we now do now? And they know they needed rapid growth, and they needed stronger leadership to get them through this. They wanted to break down the silos within the organization. This program is very leadership focused, and so they knew that traditionally in the organization, leaders, very much blinders, everything siloed. They were trying to break that up, and it was up to the leaders to sort of lead that charge. How do we create leaders who can operate like that? There was a mindset gap for the overall strategy, and get leaders to think, instead of running a function, like I'm responsible for this thing right in front of me, to I'm running a business that has impact, laterally as well. So how do we think about these things? And then just making sure overall everyone's aligned. It's very complex, all the different stakeholders, all the different leaders, making sure there's alignment, because it's very easy, as some of you probably know from your own experience. When you've got a lot of silos or a lot of fragmentation, it's easy for those different units, whether it's geography or a business line, whatever it happens to be, to sort of go in their own direction and get very calcified in that strategy. So everyone needs to be more aligned across the program. So those are the things that was facing this airline, and they said we need a leadership program that's going to help us change all of these things. So again, starting with big strategic things, these are what we need to change. we know what the current state is, and we want to be able to get to a future state. So again, in the design, they started with those things in mind. So, you know, business is business. We need everything to be from, and it doesn't just have to be airlines. They knew there were lessons to be learned from other organizations, right? So they didn't just stick with other airlines and industry best practices here. They knew from a leadership standpoint, they wanted to look around. What are e-commerce companies doing? What are tech companies doing? So that their leaders had broader acumen when it comes to leadership. Um, Figure out all the different dimensions within leadership, what have you. They need to embed that into the program as well as system thinking. How do we, these are these big, used to call them soft skills. I think sometimes you call them power skills now, but these are the kinds of skills that are often relegated to leadership development, something big like system thinking. How do we get people to think more like this across departments? And then they knew that as putting this together, in order to show people how this stuff works and how to think like this, you needed deep case studies, right? So they pulled together a lot of things from Harvard Business School cases, big organizations, Amazon, Uber, other airlines like a Ryanair. So they had a mix, right, of both industry and non-industry case studies to look at. Putting people in the shoes of those decision makers, showing it how it works to think like this and the effect that it can have. So that's very hands-on, experiential type of learning. A very blended program, of course, is what you need from a leadership standpoint. Not, those leadership development candidates tend to be pressed for time. So how do we meet their needs? But it was a 2-year journey that they laid out, and they had a university partnership, but then they had very personalized tracks, again, to meet the needs of the specific leaders. Definitely not a one size fits all, but making sure that it focused on the different elements that they had identified. And so again, they started with the outcomes, the KPIs, and how they're going to measure established up front. They ran this by and got buy-in from director and chief level executives, and just making sure that everything is going to be relevant and focused on the impact. And then, so the big questions they're asking as they do these, as they're working on things, the guiding principles, is the program improved cross-functional execution, right? Those things that are after strategic alignment. Are the leaders acting and behaving differently? Do they think and act differently? Can we demonstrably see that? And then have those learning outputs actually resulted in the business outcomes that we're hoping. So these are the things that they knew they wanted to measure when they were done. And again, another quote from this particular case study: "It was never designed as a learning initiative in isolation." Very important. From its inception, it was positioned as a business critical transformation tool. And look, I know not every single program you're going to put together in your career can be described that way. I mean, sometimes we're just training on seemingly insignificant thing, although I'd argue nothing's insignificant. But they don't feel as important as some of these things. I understand that, but at a certain point, you have to look at the thing that you're creating, and it's like, is this just a learning program, right? Or is this something that helps people do their job better? Is this something that helps the business adapt, helps the business grow, helps the business be different, better, what have you? So, really important to have that mindset. And so they looked at their very specific things. And again, they look at it like a very top down, like leadership has a huge impact on how a lot of the operations occur. And so they knew what to look for them. And they knew that this idea of like baggage compliance optimization, getting the bags in the right place, at the right time, the right way, 12% decrease in gate delays, and up to $1 million a year in revenue gains by the programs that they put in place. I couldn't tell you the ins and outs of their revenue management and overbooking model, but the way they put that together and the things that they had their leadership focus on, almost 2% annual increase in revenue from that particular program. And then they have these vacation packages, these holiday packages that they put together, and they wanted to focus on strategic positioning. 15% increase within a year of revenue per passenger based on that holidays program from the leadership down. So again, they knew going in what their outcomes were going to be, what to measure for, and then they built to that. And I know it sounds, as we're talking here today, that seems relatively obvious, but we saw from the research that it isn't. It's very hard to do, especially when everything's moving so fast. But the really successful programs, this is what they do. So I just, again, we have such a short time, just a highlight of some of the thousands of case studies that we have across learning, talent, HR, everything. And it's all about how companies were focused on business outcomes, how they designed their programs, how they delivered their programs, what the outcomes were, and lessons learned. That's in all the case studies, very, very, very in depth. They're all in the institute. So I would really, really recommend if any of you, said at the beginning, if you were interested in the institute, to follow up on that and take a look because some amazing stuff. We have a couple minutes. I was looking see if anybody had any questions, not necessarily. Industry was sharing that around sales enablement programs, training is not a direct influencer on growth targets or KPIs. So how should we attribute training to be a catalyst for delivering impact like an Explorer? I don't want to. I know we're at the end of time, Anushri, and we could, if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn or directly at Brandon Hall Group, David.Wentworth at Brandon Hall Group. We can talk a little more about that. But I would say that training, sales enablement is 100% a direct influencer on KPIs. I mean, sales is one of the best cases for how do I measure the impact of a training program, right? Because sales gets like micro measured on a daily basis. Pipeline, deal size, time to close, whatever. There's just so many measurements that are going on a constant basis that there are things that we can actually measure on a daily, weekly, monthly basis to see if things are changing. And if you put a program in place, a sales training program that changes how they approach something, how they handle objections, you can see relatively quickly whether or not those impact things are changing. So I would say that for sales enablement, you actually have a bigger opportunity for designing to impact and looking at those KPIs than more obscure thing like a leadership development program, which sometimes it's hard to say, okay, is this leadership development behavior actually impacting this outcome? So I really think that if you talk to the people in either sales or finance who are in charge of those particular outcomes and measuring them and talk with them and saying, hey, how do we make that connection? I think you can make the argument that training is, even if it's not a direct influencer, which I think a lot of times it is, it's at least a huge variable within that. A lot of times learning says, well, we can't say that we increased sales because there are too many other variables, right? It's seasonal, it's pricing, it's this, it's that. But learning does have an impact, and we have to be able to own that and stand up and say, well, are responsible for at least some of this. So I think you could take a second look at that maybe, and there's a lot of opportunity to measure to impact for sales enablement. So I'll end on that. Thanks for sticking around. I hope you all enjoy your April Fool's Day if you celebrate, and I hope to see you again on the next webinar in the series. So thank you so much.